You open up the back of a mechanical pocket watch, and what do you actually see?
Well, gears, springs.
Right. You see gears, springs, cogs, tiny little screws, and all of it is operating under these strict, unbreakable laws of physics.
Yeah, completely mathematically deterministic.
Exactly. If gear A turns, gear B is forced to turn. There is no negotiation there. It's ruthlessly deterministic. But, there's a comfort in that, right? Because it means the whole system is completely predictable.
It's a closed system. I mean, it operates exactly as it was engineered to operate, without any deviation at all. Every single outcome is just preordained by its physical architecture.
But imagine you were staring at those gears turning, you're listening to the ticking, and suddenly the mainspring just stops.
Like it breaks.
No, not because a tooth broke off a gear or because the watch wound down. It stops because it decides it simply doesn't want to turn gear B anymore.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. It makes a conscious choice. It evaluates its environment, applies some internal metric of right and wrong, and decides that turning gear B is a bad idea.
I mean, that would shatter every known law of physics.
Completely.
We wouldn't be looking at a mechanical watch anymore. We'd be looking at an impossible boundary being crossed. Like, it would be a qualitative leap from a deterministic, unthinking machine to a free agent, which is, an engineering impossibility.
It is an engineering impossibility, yet that impossible boundary, that exact qualitative leap from deterministic machine to free agent, is the core of what we are unpacking today. We are taking a highly analytical, systems-level look at a foundational text.
Yes. Specifically, we're looking at Surah Al-Mu'minun, verses 12 through 14 of the Quran.
Right. And our grounding material for this deep dive is a brilliant, an absolute masterclass of a 1977 lecture by the sociologist and philosopher Allama Parwez. And our mission today is to completely dismantle the way these verses are usually read.
Oh, we are heavily stripping away all the sentimental, poetic readings here.
Totally.
Traditionally, when people read these verses, they're about the creation of the human being in the womb. They treat it as this sort of passive, wonder of biology moment.
Right, like, oh, look at the miracle of life. Let's just marvel at it.
Exactly. But Parwez reads this text like a systems engineer, examining a schematic. I mean, this is not biology for biology's sake. It is a rigid, highly rational argument for human moral agency.
And civilizational survival.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. I invite you, the listener, to just leave behind any religious sentimentality for this deep dive. We are looking at the stark mechanics of what makes us human.
Yeah, because Parwez argues that the exact same ordered, law-governed process that built your physical body is the process that governs the social and moral world you inhabit.
But to even begin to understand the schematic, we really have to establish the baseline first, right? The fundamental difference between animals and humans.
Right, because physically, mechanically, we are animals.
We are.
Parwez references the 19th and 20th century scientific perspective heavily here, which was the absolute height of biological materialism. The prevailing conclusion then was that humans are nothing more than highly complex biological machines.
And I want to push back on the text here, or, well, at least play devil's advocate for a second, because those 19th century materialists had a really strong point.
They absolutely did.
If you take a human and a donkey and put them both on an autopsy table, the anatomy, the organs, the biological systems, they are operating on the exact same physiological laws.
Same cellular mechanics.
Right. A heart pumps blood through a circulatory system. Lungs exchange oxygen for carbon dioxide. The digestive tract breaks down proteins. It is the exact same mechanical system, just scaled differently. So if we are structurally identical to donkeys under the hood, why shouldn't we live by the law of the jungle?
Yeah, why shouldn't we?
Like, why is Parwez assuming there's a problem with humans acting like animals if biology explicitly says we are animals?
Well, the materialists of the 19th century asked that exact question.
Yeah.
And their answer was basically, there is no problem.
Right. Survival of the fittest.
Right. Survival of the fittest. Exactly. If there's no fundamental difference between humans and animals, then the laws that govern the animal kingdom should govern human society. Pure biological competition. The strong king devour the weak without any moral hesitation.
Because in that framework, morality is just an illusion. Survival is the only reality.
But this is where Parwez introduces a critical distinction between the operating systems of animals and humans. It's the difference between biological necessities and values, or what he calls adkor.
Let's ground that with an example. So an ox walks into a field and starts eating the grass.
Right.
To the ox, there is no concept of property lines. There is no concept of a deed or a fence or ethics. There's no halal versus haram, permissible versus forbidden.
It's purely a biological machine filling its stomach to fuel its cells.
Exactly. The ox operates entirely on biological necessities. It has a drive hunger, and it fulfills it.
And the critical thing to understand about the ox is that it is fundamentally incapable of violating the laws of its own nature.
It can't.
It cannot choose to starve itself to death out of a moral objection to stealing the farmer's grass. Its programming is absolute. It's deterministic.
But humans, Parwez argues, are designed to be governed by values.
Right. We are biologically driven by necessities, just like the ox. We get hungry, we seek shelter, but we have to live in complex, interconnected societies. And that requires cooperation. It requires restraint.
So we invent laws to prevent the law of the jungle. We tell each other, hey, you cannot take your neighbor's food, even if your stomach is empty.
But external laws are incredibly fragile.
They are so fragile, and Parwez uses this incredibly relatable example in the text. Imagine a person riding a bicycle who comes to a red light.
Okay, classic scenario.
Right. So if there is a police officer standing on the corner, the cyclist stops. The external law is being enforced by a physical threat to their freedom or, their wallet.
Right, the necessity of avoiding punishment keeps them in line.
But take away the police officer. It's 2 a.m., the street is completely empty, there are no cameras, and there is zero physical threat. What does the human do?
The human runs the red light.
Every time.
The external pressure is gone, so the adherence to the law completely vanishes.
Which proves a terrifying point if you really think about it. An ox cannot break the laws of physics or biology. A human can and will break a societal law the very millisecond the external pressure is removed.
And this means external societal law requires a massive, bloated infrastructure to work even partially.
Oh, absolutely. You need police forces, sprawling court systems, jails, riot gear, surveillance cameras on literally every corner.
And even with all of that trillion-dollar infrastructure, it still fails constantly. People still steal. They still cheat.
Why? Because the human being is the only creature on Earth that can look at an established law, understand it perfectly, and actively choose to violate it.
Which is the fatal flaw in trying to govern human beings purely through external constraints. If you rely entirely on a police force to keep a society functioning, you are basically treating humans like animals that just need to be penned in.
You're assuming they only respond to necessities and physical threats.
Exactly. The only metric of true humanity, the only thing that separates us from the ox, is the ability to operate on internal values when absolutely no one is watching. Your biological construction, your mechanical hardware is merely the baseline.
Which means your physical existence, your hunger, your drives, that is just the animal starting line.
Right.
If you only avoid stealing because there's a camera pointed at your face, you have not actually graduated from the animal kingdom. You are still operating on the level of necessities and external constraints.
You're still the ox.
No, the ox. The true emergence of the human being happens when you stop your bicycle at that red light at 2 a.m. on an empty street purely because you hold an internal value that respects the social contract.
You enforce the law internally.
You are the watch deciding to stop the beer.
And that profound transition from a biological deterministic machine to a value-driven moral agent is precisely what the Quran is outlining in the embryological sequence in Surah Al-Mu'minun.
So it's not just detailing fetal development.
No, it is not describing the growth of a fetus just to impress the reader with biological trivia. It is mapping the structural trajectory from pure physical determinism to moral agency. It is literally a schematic diagram of how you build a human.
Okay, I want to walk through that text step by step, but I really want to avoid reading it like a textbook glossary. We need to look at this as an assembly line.
Right, because when you strip away the poetry, it is terrifyingly automatic.
It is. So verse 12 starts the sequence. Sulamentin, an extract of clay. Parwez breaks this down as water and clay meeting to form the first life cell.
The absolute base material origin of biological life.
Right, inorganic matter synthesizing into organic matter.
It is the spark of biology. And notice the absolute determinism of it. From that basic extract, the blueprint moves to verse 13. Nutfa fi koran maken, the settled fluid in a secure resting place.
Which is the reproductive cell traveling and finally settling in the womb.
Exactly. And this is highly mechanical. It is fluid dynamics, chemical signaling, and biological programming executing its code without any conscious thought at all.
It's literally just gears turning.
Yeah.
Then the assembly line moves to the alaka stage, usually translated as a clot or a clinging entity.
Right.
It's a plasma-like stage clinging to the wall of the womb. It is essentially a parasite at this point, extracting nutrients to fuel the next phase of the assembly. There's no agency here.
None whatsoever. And following that is the muga stage, the morsel. The text describes it almost like a chewed lump of flesh.
Which aligns perfectly with the sumite stage of embryonic development.
Right, where the tissue begins to differentiate into distinct blocks that will eventually become organs and muscles. The system is just building the hardware.
Then we arrive at exam, bones, the emergence of the skeletal structure. Now, Parwez spends a lot of time on this, specifically focusing on the spine.
Yes.
This is a massive evolutionary dividing line in the animal kingdom, the separation of vertebrates from invertebrates. Why is this specific stage so critical to the argument?
Well, because a spine provides the structural integrity for what is to come. I mean, think about it. An invertebrate is largely at the mercy of its environment.
Right, it flows, it squishes, it just adapts its shape to whatever container or pressure it finds itself in.
Exactly. But a vertebrate has an internal, rigid framework. It allows the organism to bear weight, to stand upright against gravity, to move with deliberate force rather than just drifting around. It is the beginning of structural independence.
And finally, lam, flesh, clothing the bones with muscle and tissue, providing the means for locomotion, interaction, and physical power in the material world.
Right.
Now, hold on, let me stop you right here. If we pause the sequence right at this exact moment, clothed bones, we haven't actually described a human being yet, have we?
We have not. Everything we've just described, from the extract of clay to the clothed bones, is a strictly biomaterial process.
It's just animals.
It's entirely continuous with the rest of the animal kingdom. A sheep, an ox, a donkey, they all go through these exact same embryological stages in the womb.
So if I'm looking at the embryo of a donkey and a human at the exam or lam stage under a microscope, they are both operating under the exact same deterministic laws of biology.
Absolutely. There is no qualitative difference.
It is just a highly ordered assembly line building a biological machine. If the text stopped here, those 19th century materialists would be completely vindicated.
They could be 100% right.
We would just be complex animals, and the law of the jungle would be our only logical inheritance.
But the text does not stop there. Verse 14 culminates in a phrase that changes the entire paradigm, a phrase that blows up the deterministic model entirely.
And that is?
Khulqan Aakhar.
Khulqan Aakhar, a new creation.
This is the categorical leap we discussed earlier with the pocket watch.
What?
This isn't just the next biological step on the assembly line. It's not just the embryo growing hair or opening its eyes.
Right.
It implies a complete phase transition. The biological deterministic process reaches a threshold of complexity, it caps out, and then something entirely new emerges that is no longer bound solely by the laws of the previous stages.
It's not a bigger embryo or a smarter animal. It is a completely new dimension of existence.
Yeah, Parwez emphasizes that this Khulqan Aakhar marks the emergence of the self-aware, morally responsible agent. The biological machine suddenly, inexplicably, gains the capacity for islah, which means building up, reforming, or creating order, and facade, which means corruption, exploitation, or destroying order.
And that completely changes the definition of morality.
How so?
Well, an animal cannot commit facade. An animal killing another animal isn't murder, it's ecology.
Right.
A wolf isn't evil for eating a sheep, it's just executing its necessity programming.
Exactly.
Only a human possessing this new dimension of agency can commit murder or enact justice, because only a human can actually choose to do otherwise.
Which forces us to reinterpret the conclusion of the verse. It ends with the phrase, "Fatabaraka Allah Asan al-Khaliqin," blessed be God, the finest of creators.
Right.
Traditionally, readers see that and say, oh, look at how beautifully God makes bones and flesh. What a miracle. Parwez completely rejects that. The text is deploying that phrase right here, immediately after Khulqan Aakhar.
Oh, so it is not celebrating the mechanical biology of the animal kingdom.
No, it is celebrating the production of an entity capable of moral choice.
That is fascinating. The highest act of creation isn't building a complex machine. It is building a machine that can choose to disobey its own programming. The finest of creators is the one who engineers agency out of determinism.
Precisely.
But, I mean, this leaves us with a massive, almost impossible philosophical problem.
Which is?
If human creation is the result of a strictly law-governed, deterministic, step-by-step physical process fluid, clot, bone, flesh, how on earth do we get free will out of that? How does physical determinism suddenly birth agency.
Right, it is the ultimate ghost in the machine question. And Parwez addresses it by looking at how the Quran describes the endowment of this agency, focusing on the concept of the divine spirit, or the Ruh.
Okay, but before we go any further, we have to aggressively strip away the mystical baggage that usually accompanies this word.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm really glad you brought that up because this is usually where rational arguments just derail into superstition. Traditional mystical interpretations often treat the Ruh as a literal piece of God placed inside a human.
Right, like a glowing orb of divinity that is fundamentally separate from the physical universe,
Yeah.
just artificially inserted into the clay body.
Yeah, Parwez ruthlessly cuts through that. He argues that this isn't a theological ghost haunting a biological machine. It is not a literal substance.
Exactly. It represents the endowment of specific capacities: intellect, vision, and the power of choice.
So if it's not a piece of God, it's an emergent property.
Yes.
The exact same universe that produced you through deterministic material laws also possesses the potential for this Khulqan Aakhar. The system builds you up mechanically until you reach a state of physical complexity where agency becomes possible. The Ruh is the capacity for reason and moral choice. It's the software that allows the hardware to rewrite its own code.
And this capacity is what completely separates us from what Parwez calls the animal taqlid.
Taqlid, blind following, uncritical imitation. Parwez uses an incredible analogy here to illustrate the tragedy of humans who refuse to use this software.
The camels.
Yes, the camels in the desert. If you've ever seen a camel train, they walk tied nose to tail. There is a led camel and a whole line of camels behind it, each physically tethered to the one in front.
The camel in the back walks forward. Why?
Simply because the camel in front of it is walking forward. I mean, the camel in the back hasn't analyzed the route. It hasn't considered the weather or the terrain or the destination. It is tethered to the system, just executing the follow command.
It is purely deterministic behavior at the herd level.
Right.
And Parwez uses this to make a devastating critique of human behavior. When a human being operates on taqlid, when they simply believe what their ancestors believed without question, when they follow societal norms blindly, when they refuse to use their intellect to evaluate their own actions, they are actively regressing. They are voluntarily abandoning their Khulqan Aakhar status and devolving back to the animal stage of the camel train. They are tying their nose to the tail of the person in front of them.
It is a total biological and existential regression. You are given this incredible engine of reason, this emergent capacity to step outside the chain of determinism, and instead you choose to be the camel.
You take the most advanced piece of existential engineering in the universe, and you use it as a paperweight.
That is such a powerful image, and this is why Parwez's reading is the ultimate argument against fatalism. In sociology, psychology, and even everyday conversation, we constantly hear arguments rooted in determinism.
All the time. I act this way because my parents acted this way.
I am my trauma. I am poor because the system made me poor and I have no choice. My culture dictates that I do this.
It's the camel train mentality. It's claiming that you're just a gear in the watch, forced to turn because the gear next to you is turning.
But Parwez is saying that the very text that outlines your deterministic biological origins is the text that demands you transcend them. You were built by the finest ordered process in existence.
Right.
The universe went through billions of years of deterministic physics and biology specifically to produce an entity capable of choice. Therefore, you have absolutely no excuse to live your life below the level of that construction.
To deny your own agency, to claim you are merely a victim of your genetics or your sociology, is to betray the entire process of creation.
You are not a mechanical gear. You have the capacity to cut the rope tying your nose to the camel in front of you.
Now, imagine millions of these free agents interacting. This brings us to a massive shift in scale.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yes. Parwez takes this microbiology of embryology and maps it directly onto the macrosociology of human history. This is where we look at the law of requital, or Mukafite Amamal.
Let's define the law of requital carefully, because usually when people hear that phrase, they think of karma, right? Or a theological system of arbitrary punishment and reward. God sitting on a throne with a ledger, handing out gold stars for good deeds or lightning bolts for bad ones. It feels very transactional.
Yeah, we have to completely discard that notion.
Yeah.
The law of requital, in Parwez's systems-level framework, is not arbitrary theology. It is a rigid developmental law, operating exactly like the laws of embryology, but on a civilizational scale.
It is cause and effect applied to sociology.
It is societal embryology.
Societal embryology. So how does he map the biological stages? Extract, fluid, clot, bone, flesh onto the rise and fall of nations.
Well, Parwez argues that nations, civilizations, and historical movements go through these exact same developmental stages. A new society, or a new political movement, starts as a nutfa, a fluid idea.
A gathering of people with a shared but perhaps unformed vision.
Exactly. It's mobile. It's seeking a place to take root.
And when it takes root, it enters the alaka stage. It settles in a secure place. It begins to gather resources, clinging and drawing sustenance from its environment. It's a nascent community.
Yeah.
But this is where the divergence happens, isn't it?
Yes. Because biology is deterministic. A human embryo, barring physical trauma, will automatically develop bones and flesh. Society is not deterministic.
Because society is made of individuals possessing Khulqan Aakhar.
Right. Which means the society has to consciously choose to develop. It has to apply the correct inputs consciously. If a society applies the correct inputs, values, justice, intellect, rule of law, intellectual freedom at the right developmental stage, then the civilizational emergence happens. The society achieves the Izam stage. It develops a spine.
The separation between vertebrates and invertebrates applied to nations. I want to linger on this because it's a profound diagnostic tool. A nation with a spine of objective justice versus a gelatinous mass of corruption and tyranny.
Yes.
A vertebrate society can support the weight of its citizens. An invertebrate society just crushes them under its own lack of structure.
And if that spine of justice and law is built, the society clothes itself in flesh prosperity, culture, security, economic development. And ultimately, it can achieve its own macro-level Khulqan Aakhar.
It becomes a highly developed moral entity on a global scale.
Exactly, capable of building up the world rather than extracting from it. It becomes a civilization that operates on values, not just territorial necessities.
But what if they don't build the spine? What if a society chooses corruption, blind, tackwid, and injustice? What if the individuals in that society act like camels instead of free agents?
Then the developmental process stalls. And this is the true sociological law of requital. The punishment isn't a lightning bolt from the sky. The punishment is developmental failure. A civilization can abort at any stage. Parwez warns that a society can get stuck in the alaka stage forever.
Just a clinging mass of societal potential, a parasite on its own geography.
Exactly. A clinging mass that never differentiates. It never builds a skeletal structure of objective laws. It relies entirely on external policing, which we've already established always fails because you are trying to govern humans like animals.
Right.
It never develops internal values. It just consumes resources, oppresses its people, and ultimately collapses under its own gelatinous weight when challenged by a more structured entity. I mean, history is a graveyard of aborted civilizations that failed to make the qualitative leap simply because they denied the necessary inputs of justice and reason.
Okay, let me bring this down to the individual level because this creates an intense personal dilemma. What happens if you are a listener living in a society that is stuck in the alaka stage?
Right. What do you do?
A society without a spine, a corrupt invertebrate society where the law of the jungle is basically the operating system. How do you, as an individual, maintain your Khulqan Aakhar? Because the pressure to conform, to devolve back into the herd, to just pay the bribe or follow the corrupt leader is immense.
This is the crux of the entire philosophy, and it leads us directly into the concept of kuti, or the self. Parwez draws heavily on the conceptualization of kuti by the philosopher and poet Muhammad Iqbal to answer this exact dilemma.
The cultivation of the self versus its annihilation.
The fundamental premise is that every human is born with an undeveloped self. You are born with the potential for kuti, the rue, the agency we discussed, but it is raw. It is unformed. It is a seed, not a tree.
Parwez uses an incredibly powerful analogy from Iqbal's poetry here to explain what we're supposed to do with this unformed self. It's the analogy of the pearl.
Yes.
Picture a single drop of spring rain falling from the sky. It plunges into a turbulent, chaotic, violently churning ocean. This drop of rain represents the human personality, the raw, undeveloped self, thrown into the chaos of the world. It's small, it's fragile, and it's surrounded by massive, overwhelming forces trying to tear it apart.
And in traditional mystical thought, particularly in certain strands of Sufism, the ultimate goal of that drop of water is fana, annihilation.
And I have to admit, fauna sounds incredibly appealing.
It does.
The idea is that the drop is suffering because it is separated from the whole. It is an individual, and individuality brings pain, turbulence, and the heavy burden of responsibility. So the highest spiritual achievement is for the drop to just dissolve back into the vast ocean.
Just let go.
Right, to lose its identity entirely and find peace in non-existence, merging with the divine ocean. It sounds peaceful. Stop fighting the currents, let the ocean take you, stop trying to maintain your shape in a world that is constantly trying to crush you.
It sounds peaceful, and that's why it is such a seductive philosophy. But Parwez and Iqbal before him violently reject this idea.
They hate it.
They argue that fauna is a betrayal of the entire evolutionary process we just spent the first half of this deep dive establishing.
Which makes perfect logical sense. If the universe spent billions of years moving from deterministic clay through the complex stages of embryology to finally produce a localized, highly complex agent capable of free will, the Khulqan Aakhar, why would the ultimate spiritual goal then be to dissolve that agency back into the undifferentiated mass?
Right, it makes no sense.
It's like building an incredibly advanced supercomputer just so you can melt it down for scrap metal.
It is regression disguised as spirituality. So instead of dissolving, Parwez uses the other half of the poetic analogy. The drop of rain falls into the ocean, yes, but it doesn't dissolve. It is swallowed by an oyster.
It enters an environment of extreme pressure.
Inside that shell, it endures immense pressure. The ocean is spinning it, the currents are crashing against it. It is a constant violent struggle. But the drop's mission is not to lose itself in the pressure. Its mission is to resist the dissolution.
To maintain itself.
To integrate itself, to take all that pressure, all that turbulence, and use it to slowly, layer by layer, harden into an indestructible pearl.
The pressure of the world isn't meant to crush you. It's the mechanism of your crystallization. The chaos of an invertebrate society isn't your excuse to dissolve. It's the raw material for building your cootie.
The drop becomes a pearl. And once it is a pearl, you can throw it back into the most violent ocean on Earth, and the ocean can no longer dissolve it.
The water just washes over it.
Exactly. It has achieved permanence through integration. It has become something that the environment can no longer break down.
So how do we actually do that mechanically? What is the actual mechanism for turning the drop into a pearl in daily life?
By operating on values rather than necessities, this is the practical application of AdCore. Let's go back to the cyclist at 2 a.m.
Right.
When you are faced with a choice and you choose to act according to an internal moral value, even when it is difficult, even when it costs you something financially or socially, even when absolutely no one is looking, you add a layer to your pearl.
You integrate your personality.
You solidify your cootie. You declare your independence from biological necessity.
Every time you choose a value over a convenience, you harden the pearl.
Precisely. And conversely, every time you violate your own values, every time you act out of pure biological necessity or animal instinct, when a moral choice was required, you introduce a crack in the pearl.
Oh, wow.
You disintegrate your personality. You dissolve a little bit more back into the chaotic waters of the animal kingdom.
Your daily actions aren't just passing moments in time. They aren't just things that happen and are forgotten. They are the active pressures shaping your structural integrity.
Right.
Every single choice either builds the Khulqan Aakhar or aborts it. If you lie to get ahead, if you steal, if you succumb to blind tackle it and just follow the herd, you aren't just breaking a rule. You are actively destroying your own existential structure. You are choosing to be a drop of water instead of a pearl.
And this ties back to the law of requital on a personal level. The universe doesn't punish you for lying by dropping a piano on your head. The punishment is internal, structural, and immediate. The punishment is the disintegration of your cootie. You become less of a human being and more of an animal, entirely dependent on external forces to keep you in line. You lose your structural integrity.
You become the invertebrate society, but on an individual level, a jellyfish floating in the current instead of a pearl that can withstand it.
Exactly.
This is a massive reframing of morality. It's not about pleasing an angry deity to avoid a theoretical hellfire. It's about structural survival. It's existential engineering. It's about building a self that can survive the universe.
It is entirely about survival. And that is why Parwez insists that this text is a textbook on how to survive the human condition. It's a manual for constructing an indestructible personality.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of this text. Because the Quran doesn't end the sequence with the new creation. It bridges the biological and the sociological one last time to show how it's all one vast interconnected system.
Right, verse 15.
Yeah. Immediately after describing the emergence of the moral agent in verse 14, verse 15 hits you with the stark reality of death. Then indeed, after that, you are to die. It is a reminder of the physical limits of the biological machine.
The biological machine will fail, the gears will eventually stop turning, the fleshy components are temporary by design.
But then it seamlessly transitions into this beautiful ecological sequence in verses 18 through 22. It talks about sending down rain from the sky, lodging it in the earth, bringing forth gardens of palm trees and grapevines, the fruits you eat, the animals that provide milk and transport.
Bitches.
It zooms out from the embryo to the entire biosphere. Why jump from embryology to death to ecology? What is the connection?
Parwez synthesizes this beautifully. He argues that it is one single continuous arc. The exact same ordered, rational, law-governed process that built your body in the womb, the process that turned clay into a moral agent, is the exact same process that builds the ecosystem that sustains you.
It is all one unified, highly integrated system.
You were built by the same ordered process that builds the ecosystem. The laws of embryology, the laws of sociology, and the laws of ecology are fundamentally the same laws.
Meaning the universe is not chaotic.
No.
Yeah.
It is not fundamentally hostile to you. The system is designed to produce and sustain the Khulqan Aakhar. The universe is on your side, provided you operate according to its laws. It is a nurturing environment for the development of the pearl if you understand how to use the pressure.
You were engineered by a rational process to live in a rational ecosystem. The only variable, the only chaotic element in this entire unified system is human choice.
Exactly.
The ecosystem provides, the biology functions, until human facade corruption and exploitation disrupts the balance.
Which leaves us with the ultimate question. The biological evolution is complete. You have the physical structure. You have the capacity for intellect and agency. You are the Khulqan Aakhar. The only question left is whether you will choose to operate at the high level of the entity you were engineered to be, or whether you will regress to the pre-moral, deterministic stage that the embryology left behind.
Will you be the camel blindly following the herd, tethered to the past and afraid to think? Or will you be the pearl, holding your structure against the pressure of the ocean, defined by your internal values?
The external laws cannot force you to be human. The police cannot force you to be a pearl. You have to cultivate the cootie yourself. The universe built the arena, but you have to choose to step into it as a free agent.
This has been an incredibly dense, eye-opening exploration. We've gone from the autopsy of a donkey in the 19th century to the sociological collapse of civilizations, all drawn from a few lines of a foundational text analyzed through the lens of systems engineering.
It's remarkable.
It demands active engagement rather than passive reverence. It tells you that reading the text is not enough. You have to embody the structural integrity it describes.
You have to become the pearl.
So, what does this all mean for us today, right now? I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought. Something to mull over as you navigate your own life and look at the world around you. We've established that our physical, biological evolution is essentially finished. We have the hardware. But is our current societal evolution stalled in the womb?
That's the real question.
Look at the global crises we face today. The massive inequality, the resource hoarding, the blind tacklet of political tribalism where people just follow the camel in front of them, even if it's walking off a cliff.
Right.
Are these crises just random chaos? Or are they the violent growing pains of a civilization trying, and perhaps currently failing, to make that qualitative leap into its own Khulqan Aakhar? Are we, globally, stuck in the alaka stage, a clinging, undifferentiated mass of societal potential, desperately needing to build a spine of values before the entire system aborts?
If the diagnosis is correct, the biology works. The ecosystem works.
The failure is entirely in our refusal to utilize the agency we were given to build a vertebrate society. You open the watch, you see the gears turning flawlessly, but the mainspring has to decide to move the hands. The machine is built. Now it's time to see what it chooses to do. Keep questioning, keep building that pearl, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.